Okay, so I'd really like to thank you guys for coming out. I think this program is awesome, put on by Summer Sessions, Gail, Michelle Bartlett, Allison Janot. Am I missing anyone? Shawenta and Katie Kennedy have worked with all of them. That's awesome. They work really hard to make programs like this happen. So I'm going to share some of my views on artwork, some ideas and inspiration. So the title of this is going to be, what is it about art? And that's sort of a rhetorical question. I think we all answer it ourselves, but it has a lot of meaning to me when I think, well, what is it about art? Why is this philosophical thing out there that we do? Why is it so important? So we'll analyze that as we go along. Okay, so I'd like to start, see if I go the right way, with my mom and dad, because without them I wouldn't be here. And so I think that's my mom, a few years ago, before she died. Anyway, my mom was born in Thomasville, Georgia, southern Georgia. Worked as a school teacher in a little town called Statenville, where she met my dad. And my dad was born in northern Alabama, a little podunk town, an intersection called Danville. It does have a post office, but that's about it. And my dad, from a young age, worked on the family farm. They were relatively, I don't know if poor is the right word. They struggled. They worked hard. So from a young age, he started working on the farm, played basketball, was really into sports, and during the off season, he would go maybe to Chicago and work in auto industry just to have a little extra money. Ended up getting a bachelor's degree in biology at the University of North Alabama. That's in Florence. So not Roll Tide, the other one. And so he used to brag about getting his degree in biology before they invented DNA. So anyway, in 1976, I think farming, teaching in Alabama is a pretty big struggle for him. Dad liked to travel, wanted to come to Alaska, and I should move this on. That's my dad. So wanted to come to Alaska, so in 1976, they up and moved here. They got offered teaching jobs, first in Fairbanks, and then they moved out to North Pole where they retired. And after they retired, you'll notice these pictures have a lot to do with wood. So they, when they retired, they bought a sawmill and started sawing lumber. And a few years ago now, but I think they did it to have something to do. But it worked out well for me because when they first started, I wanted to build furniture and was dabbling in woodwork, and then that became more and more of a lifestyle for me. Okay, let's see what we got here. Oh, moving on. So Brenda, my wife, met in high school and started dating, and a few years later, she was going to school for biology, and I was not sure about this school thing, so I kind of dabbled around. And she was in the honors program, and she got a chance to go to Mexico for a semester, and so she went to Mexico, and I went to the Marine Corps in the reserves, but it wasn't vindictive. It was something I really wanted to do. It was yeah, my mom wasn't very happy either. So anyway, the Marine Corps ended up being a huge part of my life. Being in the reserves, so I was flying to Anchorage every month. Became more and more of a struggle, and eventually I just couldn't see staying there. But it was a big influence in my life, early years. Oh, the rest of our family. Okay, so this is my niece, Bryn Morse, who wish she was here, just graduated from law school. And she's holding our two cats, which we fondly refer to as the hooligans. So, influences. As an artist, I think we have tons and tons of influences. I picked a few things that I think were important to me from a young age. And it kind of starts with this place. Now, this is a plantation in southern Georgia. It's called Pebble Hill Plantation. And it's quite a wonderful place. My family we didn't grow up in an artist family. We grew up where, other people were artists. And we did appreciate it. I think artists were really revered in this, wow, people can do that sort of light. And anyway, so things like this became sort of things I attached to this architecture. I think you would call it Southern colonial. I don't think it's Gothic. I think it's Southern. Anyway, this plantation, that was the house. It's part of the barn. The barn's huge, but it's where my grandparents lived. So Pebble Hill Plantation's a few miles south of Thomasville. The architect for designing all this was Abram Garfield, who was the youngest son of President Garfield. So there's actually, I think I knew that at one time, but it was all brand new to me again today when I was putting this together. So this plantation, as plantations are, they're just monster cool farms. So as a kid, we would go stay there, play around in the barns. They did put a lot of limits on us because southern Georgia is really known for rattlesnakes and that area, alligators, as well as ticks, chiggers, all the bad stuff. So endless places to run around, hide, play hide and seek. There were sections of this barn that were dedicated to like carriages that nobody really used anymore, but there would be like racing carriages, horse-drawn buggies, milk carts. As a kid, staying there, they still delivered milk by horse in a wagon. Just tell them what you wanted. They showed up with milk, little glass bottles, pop top off of it. It was pasteurized, not homogenized, so it'd have like that much cream on top of it. It's kind of a neat sort of thing we don't see anymore. So the plantation was originally, when it was originally built, it was for cattle. And the lady that owned it at the time, I was around, she had changed things over to horses and done away with all the dairy side of the barn, or the plantation. One thing about the plantation is, the South in general, are the trees. You have these, my favorite of the large trees is the live oak, and there's lots of them across the South. During Civil War, maybe earlier, the government would not let you cut them because they needed those parts of the tree that grew in strange angles for building boats. It's a little bit of the woodworking side that falls into to this idea behind this tree that I really like. So the live oaks are fairly common in the South, and a lot of them are they're huge. They're monster big. Maybe 12 foot in diameter across the stump, but the limbs will actually run down and touch the ground and come back up. They're so large. And that kind of, when I was on this trip, I had an uncle that just died, and I was down there, took some pictures of one of the largest live oak trees is in Thomasville. And I used it for reference information for one of my prints that's later on in the presentation. So my grandfather was grew up as a carpenter, cabinet maker, and he worked for the lady that owned this plantation. They became good friends, and she kind of had him do all the work, you know, post-construction for repairs and whatnot. So hanging out with him as a kid, I started developing this craftsmanship, love of craftsmanship, the architectural details in places like this. I didn't pull any close up photos of it, but I think you can gather by looking at it that it took some real skilled people to build this, and this was built, you know, in the 20s when there was very little power tools that were not industrial. So for me, a large part of my life being about craftsmanship, where quality of work, knowledge of materials and tools have always been a super important part of what I do. So while going to school at later in life, I brought a lot of craftsmanship with me as I moved into the art world, and trying to make that mental transition between being a craftsman and being an artist was not hard, but a thing I always fought against, where, well, how can you just do this work without really, really knowing your materials? And it felt like workmanship, craftsmanship took a back seat to the composition or concept, or, you know, the process of making art. And somehow that kind of bothered me that we elevated the art and did not elevate craftsmanship or the work along with it. And even had classes that were strictly based on concept, where the concept was the only idea, so you basically eliminate all craftsmanship. And I just disagreed with it. It's everybody gets to think what they want there. So I did start really pushing the ideas of craftsmanship and art together. I think those are the same things you see historically, say Renaissance time frame, up until maybe the early 1900s, where modern art kind of threw it all out the window and said, we'll do whatever we want, and they did. So, and because of that, I did lots and lots of research into art materials. I think Corinna Gomez was teaching printmaking after she got her master's degree, and she really talked a lot about the archival side of printmaking, and I think she was working at the museum at the time, and they were dealing with prints that were starting to show acid and problems while in storage. So kind of went down a rabbit hole there. Well, how do you stop that? How do you correct for that? That led over into sculpture maybe. Not so much sculpture, because we're dealing with steel, with bronze, aluminum. For the most part, I deal with metal. There's lots of sculpture out there that's not. But short of bronze rot and rust, that stuff will be here forever. It's very, very stable as far as a material. And then I really wanted to paint. I mean, I really, really wanted to paint. And for years, I held back. I just stayed away from it. It's like too much. I don't have time to break the code on that as well. But later I did, and took a couple of painting classes with Todd Sherman, like little short 3-day classes. I don't know if you guys know who Todd Sherman was. He used to be printmaking, painting. I don't know if he ever taught painting. I don't know what all he taught. He was the dean when I was here, the dean of arts. So I worked with Todd a lot, still work with him occasionally, and started painting outside, you know, this thing called plein air. And that, should move forward. That really started my painting and what I wanted to do in painting and research into those materials. So craftsmanship, I guess I'm backing up. Craftsmanship. So when I was doing my talk, when I was graduating, had to come up here, same room, do a little talk, and one of my professors asked me, do you consider yourself more of a craftsman or an artist? And without hesitation, I went, oh, wait, far more a craftsman. And the more I thought about that over the years, both of them, I started going, well, no, it's not that. It's that I think they hold equal weight, because being a great artist without craftsmanship doesn't work for me, and being a great craftsman without any ability to design doesn't work either. So I think they share some territory, both important. So some of the things I would ask students, or when I was teaching here, teaching sculpture, was about craftsmanship, the archival qualities, but aesthetic qualities as well. I think frames for paintings are very, very important. If you're a painter, any way possible, frame your paintings. I think that it's that finishing touch that they need, my opinion, but feel that way strongly. Having your artwork gallery ready. It's not done until it's done. That was a really important part of teaching sculpture. If you're doing a print, matting, how you frame that, a really important combination. And really out of all that, the thing I've done the longest, the thing I had the biggest problem with, is how do you display sculpture? So you go to a gallery and you have a podium. You set your sculpture on there, it looks cool, it's in a gallery. But what do you do with it if you buy that sculpture and take it home? Do you have a shelf that it works with? Is it too big? Is it too heavy? So bases for sculpture, for several years I really worked on this idea of how do you, not the artwork, the base, the part that should kind of disappear into the background and just be there. And it's still a battle. I mean, I guess we could give those big square white boxes to people when they buy a sculpture, and good luck. So other considerations were, how will it be viewed? With, paintings, you have a wall that's fairly simple. Sculpture is 3D. Can you get all the way around it? Should you get all the way around it? So let's look at some of this craftsmanship stuff. So this is it's stuff I've done for quite a while. It's just a set of dovetails, half blind. The groove in there, so it rides on a slide when you put the drawer into a box. There's a little closer to finished. Those are the drawer pulls. Can't just go buy something and stick it on there. So it's Cocobolo, and that's how it looks finished. So some really important details on that were how do you carve that face and then have that transition from one material to the next, so it gives you that scallop, I don't know if I can, this scalloped edge around the base of the piece. Just little small things that come together sometimes. Let's see what else we got here. Framing. So I already said frame your work. So the transition from being a primary woodworking guy doing projects for people to now I've got a lot of friends that are artists, and hey, can you frame my artwork? So it was kind of an ordeal. I think for the first few years, I worked a lot with Gail Prouty. So the first few years, it was kind of like, I don't know, let's try this. What do you think? And we get something framed, look good. And maybe I'd find another way to streamline it, maybe cut some costs out of it. So yeah, I'll make frames for my friends. And then that kind of started hitting really fast, really hard. So about 2018, I'm taking a guess. We probably did 250 frames that year, most of it like within probably 6 months. So, so you're knocking out a lot of frames at that point. And I had a couple of grad students and other undergrads working with me some, and they were a huge help. And then I noticed that I started being introduced to other people as the frame guy, Yeah, Scott does my frames. So somehow I just really wanted to be known for other things. So it was a little bit of a good thing, but also wanted to be known for being an artist as well. So frames, this is kind of the life you're living. You cut a whole bunch of the same identical parts, you glue them together, you have battles with glue ups, and I probably got pictures with even more clamps on something than this. Sometimes it's just what it takes to get that piece to stay together until the glue sets. And I thought it was kind of funny. Nobody will ever ask me for frames again, maybe after seeing this. And then set up in the shop and do the finish on them, which is, when it comes right down to it, it's about a third of the work between sanding, spraying. I'm not going, oh, wait. So was this 2018, 2019, somewhere in there? So this was a commission of 1% that Gail had for Ryan Middle School, is that right? And I was just kind of wanted to show off how much, a frame can make a piece pop. And these are huge. They were 3 or something by 8, or they were huge. They're really, really big paintings, which means you got to have really, really big frames. And they were a little bit of a battle on my end, and I didn't have to do the painting. I watched Gail, as these paintings progressed. She was working at Dave Mollett's studio while he was on sabbatical, and they came together quite well, and that just led into more people wanting me to do frames. I think the next set was Liz Irving and her show at the Anchorage Museum. So, frames. Okay, so art. I think this is the common everyday question for maybe freshmen walking into college. What is art? And I still find it very important, so I do give my working definition of art, and I do that because I think it explains most of the information you need when you're thinking about art. So, art is the process or production of deliberately arranging elements in ways that appeal to intellect, senses, or emotion. To be considered art, work must be made, modified, displayed for the purpose of its aesthetic qualities and made by a human being. To be considered art, an item performance must have meaning that relates to its aesthetic, such as beauty, form, and one's own taste. An intellectual, emotional effect is experienced when the observer and art are brought together. So that it's kind of it's a working definition. So I was thinking, how do I shorten that and still get most of the information across without having to read this every time I do a talk? So I'm thinking about just cutting it back to this, and art is the purposeful manipulation of materials to create work having aesthetic value and concept to which we assign meaning. And I want you to think a lot about that word meaning in these definitions, because meaning is the part of art that makes it valuable, that makes it something you want to hang on to, something that you invest your life into. So printmaking, I was always interested in sculpture, had taken sculpture classes off and on over the years, and had worked with Todd Sherman some, helping him with some of the work he was doing. and got interested in printmaking, and that was primarily because of Todd and going in and seeing what the artists were doing in the printmaking studio. And so for me, it was a way to make multiple works, which should keep the cost down some. It was allowing me a 2D process instead of sculpture, which is 3D, for the most part, very 3D. And it's very tactile. So a lot of what you do in printmaking is you're cutting with chisels, kind of the same thing you do with wood. There's a lot of hands-on and with paper and texture and how that piece presents as you work on it. So really got into printmaking, really enjoyed it, and hope to get back into it more. We do have our new printmaking professor here, Sasha Bitzer, if you guys are interested. So some of my prints, I always really liked penguins, and it's just one of those things. It's a personal thing. I think if you've ever seen a rock hopper penguin, you'll know they're just the cutest things in the world. Probably not a good house pet, but who knows? So this is one I did based off of a painting that I had done, and it's a linoleum cut. I don't know how many colors there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 or 5. And this was when I was talking about the live oak trees in the South. So I used roughly the idea of a live oak for doing this print. So this is like one of the only pieces I started cutting the print before I had the drawing finished. So I was kind of working both on the drawing and the piece at the same time. I was just drawing on linoleum and cutting it when I had time. So this was also right after the death of my uncle, so I think there was something going on there. It wasn't because of him, but definitely had a impact. So sculpture's been my primary focus in art for a long, long time. I got into sculpture early on because I was interested in making hardware for furniture. I couldn't get specific hardware in a quality that I wanted, or I didn't know how to anyway. So I got into sculpture to make hardware, and that went out the window about 5 seconds later, and I started working towards artwork. So in returning to sculpture several years later, the museum had asked for some sculptures to be placed outside, and we kind of threw together a proposal. It was go through all the process, but it was still kind of down and dirty. Hey, we want you to do this, but you still got to do all the paperwork that goes with it. And this was a piece I did, and it was in relationship to the research vessel Sekuliak, if any of you guys know, which was kind of cool because Brenda, my wife, was working for Institute of IMS, Institute of Marine Science. Institute of Marine Science, and she was very familiar with the Sekuliak and was at one time supposed to ride the boat up to Alaska, and it was delayed for whatever construction reasons. So I started going, well, what do you do with the materials in your own backyard that, you know, we can do something that's artistic, set out in front of the museum? And that's what I came up with. Now it sits in my yard collecting rust, and I still like the piece. It's got cast parts in it. It's got hand cut, hand drawn parts in it. I think the main thing I bought was that chain, and I was going to do several of them until I bought enough to do one of those jellyfish, and it was like $75 worth of chain. And I was like, they get one. So there's a few little hard to see things in there. Maybe you can find it on YouTube.
How tall was that?
7, 8 feet in the center. Maybe. So moving forward a few years, Wendy Croskery, the sculpture professor, and myself, one of the other students, John Boning, really wanted to develop an iron program. Well, we wanted to make a furnace. She wanted to develop an iron program. So we all sat down and we whittled out a plan to build a furnace, figured out how to get materials to Fairbanks, working with foundries in Texas, a guy named Donnie Keene in particular. And anyway, we built a furnace. We had several people that have had a lot of experience running furnaces come help us the first couple of years. And we were casting iron. So this piece is 35, 40 pounds, the shell, of course. And one of the things about this piece was I wanted to be able to cast it without having big sprues entering the piece. So I used the seaweed as a sprue and vented the back side. But it is finished both sides. I just don't have a picture of the back. And then I think this is a picture from my BFA show a couple of years ago. And this idea of sculpture and where you take it was, I was doing pretty good at this time, and started thinking, well, masks are like known around the world. Different cultures have different masks. They have so much meaning in those cultures. And then I started looking at me, the white guy, where is the culture that I have in masks? You know, you go to Hawaii, you have a mask. You go to anywhere in Alaska and there's a mask. You go to Africa and there's masks. But whatever my culture was doing for masks was gone long, long ago. It was not preserved, which leads into keeping the Native Arts program functioning and going is extremely important to me. But I wanted to do something that was reflective of my culture. It's like, well, we got movie icons, comic books, not a whole lot out there. If it didn't come off a video game or comic book, TV show, we don't really have it. So I decided to do a series. I did 5 in total, maybe 6, but this is one of them. This is the Lone Ranger. Okay, painting. My love of painting. There's something about painting that it goes beyond sculpture for me. It goes beyond printmaking, and I think it's like printmaking, you have controls in place. I think sculpture, you have controls in place. But when it comes to paint, you just have a bunch of stuff that you got to make some art out of. And that can be kind of tough. So I played around with different things. Started off painting in acrylics and realized probably within the first few months that it was very limiting for me, but I fought it. It's like, I don't want to set up again for oils. I just want to make this work. And I tried really, really hard. And finally, I threw it out the window and went oils. So that open time of oils was really important to me. If you painted this in one session, but let's say the color was off on your olives, you could just wipe that out and repaint it. And that was important to me, because the more layers you add on, the less bounce you get off the canvas behind your work, which may or may not affect your piece. So this was from a show last year. It was a booze show. You guys happened to see it at Wells Street. Some of the pictures are on my website. If you guys grab a card, you can check them out. So the idea, my thought going into this was, it gives me a chance to do reflection, gives me a chance to do, like, how do you make liquid look like liquid on a background? It let me work with color, like intense color, because generally doing a landscape, you're really knocking your colors back. you're graying them out. You're modifying those colors so they're not punchy. They're kind of a tonal sort of take on it. And with this, it let me push that color just a little bit more. And then this love of painting, plein air work. This is the secretary from the art department, Carol Hoffler, freshly retired. She would go out painting with me quite a bit. And somewhere off on the other side to your right is my nephew swimming in the Chattanooga River. And this idea of painting outside allowed me to, hey, let's go here and paint. So the idea of traveling and having something to do was really an important part of that. Because being stuck in the studio all the time, painting, well, that's great in January. But if you could be here in January, well, maybe not exactly there, but someplace warm, that's quite nice. So Monument Valley, Grand Canyon, all in one trip. It was pretty fun. This is down, I think the next year, down around, well, it's east of Phoenix, about 60, 70, maybe 100 miles. Back in one of the back roads, I was driving along, and I was down there with Devontae, if any of you guys know Devontae Owens, and my dad. And we're driving along, we come over this hill, and it's like, gotta stop and paint that, because it just had a cool effect, and so we did. Materials. Materials are maybe one of the, if I feel like I'm starting to be an expert at anything, now let's back that off. If I feel like I'm starting to know a little bit about something, I'd say it's materials. So with that said, I feel like I don't know very much. You know, it's one of those, the more you know, the less you know, sort of areas. So materials have just been something that I've always been very in tune with. So I'm a very tactile artist. I'm very, you know, everything I do is kind of hands-on. I don't have, not that there's anything wrong with it, but I don't have much use for like CNC cut stuff or it's computer numerically controlled that can cut the same shape over and over again. I like doing it by hand. I think it adds a quality to it because it's hand done. Not because it's cheaper, not because we're going to knock out 1,000 of them, but it just adds something to it. So very, very tactile. And this quite often leads into hours and hours and hours of research on one thing, trying to kind of find out, well, why does this work that way? Most often, that rabbit hole leads into either multiple answers that may or may not be right, or the information is not very well presented, so you're still not getting the answer you need. So my materials only goal was to understand like compatibility in artwork, the workability of that material, and what its archival qualities are. So this is me making lead white. So this is coils of lead here, and this is acetic acid or vinegar, and the center there is just yeast and sugar water. So one's producing acetic acid and one's producing carbon dioxide, and that reacts with lead, and it produces lead carbonate and lead hydroxide, both of which are really toxic. But that's not as bad as like when you get done and you have all this lead white, it's super fine powder. Well, you touch it and it just kind of flips into the air and you really don't want to breathe it. But being ultra super careful going through the processes, I was and still am making my own lead white paint. There's ways to control that dust, just so you know, so it's not all that dangerous there. You gotta be really careful washing it because what you're washing off of it is lead acetate. and lead acetate is the only part of that you can absorb through your skin readily. So the powder, you can touch it, just wash your hands, don't eat it. The liquid, when you wash that, you got to dispose of it properly, and just being careful with it. So, but it's kind of a thing I do. So there's other archival reasons behind lead paint. Just so you know, I'm not doing it just to be different or want to play with toxic materials. One, buying lead paint is extremely hard to get, and it's expensive. The quality of it is unknown, and lead in a painting, in an oil painting, produces lead ions that will actually strengthen the entire paint layer, making it more archival. So lots of research been done on lead and how it works. It's the most flexible of your paints, and when they're doing bend tests, break tests. So moving on, this was us working in Judy Warwick's studio. If you guys know who Judy Warwick is, she has a glass studio over Phillipsfield Road, back in there. And I don't know how much work she's doing now. For years, she had this guest artist. And sorry I didn't write his name down. He's a very super talented guy. But she invited us over to cast glass. So we'd done, all the metals. Well, this glass thing, we didn't know anything about. It's like, cool, I can make sand mold, something cool out of glass, So we showed up with these glass molds, and this guy that's been casting glass, blowing glass his entire life, looked at him and he just shook his head. He's like, we can try, let's see what we get. And they wouldn't let us, well, they did let us pour some of our stuff. We did it a couple of times. The first time they were like, we might be able to pour that and make it work. The next time we had a clue, and we poured our own stuff. And I'll tell you, out of everything I've done with metals, running blast furnace, casting bronze, none of it is near as hot as this is. This is the hottest thing I've ever done. And he's wearing a t-shirt. He must have calluses on his arms all the way up. That ladle, you can see that ladle's glowing red, and that heat just radiates up the handles. It's murder. So there's that glass cooling down. This top one up here is that Muller back on the table back there, a little glass Muller, cast while I was there. Close up, and then I had to do this one. So materials. So I kind of threw it in as a spoof, thinking Indy might be here, but so this is Indy showing how fun it is to make other people's artwork. So I think she cast about 300 of these parts for me over a few days. Okay. So concept. That's probably the one thing, if an artist can get this down, if an artist can really become good with concept, I think you'll be successful regardless of what your skill level is, how talented, how it's presented, as long as you get it out there and people see it. So back to my BFA show, I had some pieces that worked really well for concept. So there's this idea of graffiti that I wanted to bring into the scope of kind of acknowledging it as artwork. So I painted the train on the wall. I've made the paint can is a sculpture. It's all cut out of steel, and I named it "Get Ready." Kind of like, here comes train, let's paint it. Sort of a fun take on that. And anyway, kind of a fun idea of a concept. One of the cool things about this is if you take the train away, the sculpture works kind of anywhere. Like, you could go set it next to a train where it's already got graffiti. You could set it pointing at something else, so that's your art. So you get a different sort of interaction with it, so that concept can be changed just by location, which is kind of a cool thing. This one's called Huffin' Puffin'. Not so original of a name, but I think it works for the piece. It was a piece I started on several years ago for think it was an invitational show at Wells Street, and it had to be birds. So I had it almost done, and it just didn't feel right about finishing it, so I stopped and just didn't enter the show. And then last year for the faculty show, I put it in the gallery, and it's the first time it had been shown. So it's all cut out steel, painted in oils, and fun piece. It's about 8 feet long. Yeah, so it's pretty good size, fairly heavy, really sharp. Another idea, another concept piece, 2014-ish, with the internet streaming, you could have Netflix. You know, that was pretty, you know, we no longer had to go to Blockbuster and rent videos or buy them. So now you could go home, turn on Netflix and watch a movie. Or you could watch the opening screen, because our internet really kind of sucked, and we didn't we didn't really get it. So the idea behind it was to paint this huge flat screen TV with the opening screen on it mounted on an actual TV mount, so that it mounts on the wall. It can articulate just like a flat screen TV would. So that's in my living room now. So when the internet's not working, I can just look over at that and save some electricity. So inspiration. Wow. Inspired by so many things. Where do you start? So I picked a couple. This was, I've been working in Printmaking studio late one evening, probably late August, and I was driving home, and I went over Blaine Hill, and this is what I was looking at. And of course, the picture does it no justice, but it's still pretty awesome. So I stopped and took a picture of it. It's like, wow, that's incredible. I was in Sedona, Arizona. I was in Sedona, and one morning I was there with Brenda and my nephew, and all of a sudden, it's kind of like you have this light color, and then all of a sudden it changed, and everything turned red. And I knew what was going on, so I don't really have a camera, I have a phone. So I ran outside and took a picture of it, and it was like maybe one of the best sunrises I'd ever seen. So I was sitting there like, is it gonna get better? Is it gonna, taking pictures, about 80 of them. And then that went away, and we drove back to Phoenix, Apache Junction, Superstition Mountains, and that was the sunset that night. So same day, an awesome sunrise, an awesome sunset, tons of inspiration there. So one of the last things I'm going to talk about, I'm going to try not to jam through it too fast, but this idea of traveling, sharing, and exploring, they're really important to me. I think as artists, maybe I'm drawn to plein air painting because it's fun to go out with your friends and paint. Maybe I'm drawn to sculpture because you really can't do much of that by yourself. You've got to have some help. And I like the idea of working with people, with sharing ideas, information. And I know that it's common across all the arts, but for me and the things I do, those sort of lead the way. So traveling, it gets you out, you're still doing artwork, you can call it your job and go for a drive and take pictures or paint something on the side of the road. And you can go look at stuff like Superstition Mountains and try to figure out how to break that down and paint it before the light changes. Sometimes just going out and doing a little sketch that's can't remember the name of it. It's in Sedona. Just a rock formation. It's really common. Or this is the road that goes to Hope. If you're headed to Seward and you hang a right, you drive back in there a little ways, and you'll see this off to your right on one of the little pull-offs. So it was a painting I had done years ago. But just wonderful little areas across the world. So going there and painting that with other people is, that's the fun. You get to sit there and laugh and joke. And so I'd take that's my sister-in-law and 3 of her kids. I take them out occasionally. Hey, let's go painting. And the kids loved it, at least for the first hour. And then they were like, can we go home? But whatever, it was still a lot of fun. Produced some work. This is out off Murphy Dome. And there's Carol Hoffler again. She go painting with me. This is down in Satran, Healy. Sitting on the side of the road, you can see she's just tickled to be there. It's one of the most incredible days I've ever seen in Healy. The sun was out all day. There was no wind, no bugs. The leaves had turned, and it was about 75 degrees. It wasn't too hot like it is here. So incredible day out there painting. It's also out off Murphy Dome. The rock behind us there is one I've painted many, many times, not from this side, but it's my nephew and Marlis, for those of you who know Marlis. She's always a lot of fun to go out with. And that's the Grand Canyon, and the lady there is Sarah Day. She graduated 7 or 8 years ago, a long time ago, but I was headed down there with my nephew, and I was like, hey, I'm going to the Grand Canyon. Let's go painting. She's like, okay. So we met at the Grand Canyon, spent a few days painting. We ended up at Monument Valley, and then kind of went our separate ways. So that's it. I would love to entertain. I guess there's one more thing before the end, and that's kind of where I'm headed now. And I kind of threw it in as a last minute thought, because I think it's important to know where you're headed as an artist. And I do intend to paint more and more plein air and get out there and spend maybe 2-3 days a week out painting, at least in the summer, not in, snow flies. It's pretty cold because you're not moving, so you're not generating any heat. And then I think increasing the size and scope of sculpture I'm working on are 2 of the main things I'm looking at doing at this point. Now, are there any questions? Bueller? Okay.
So why didn't you, the puffin one?
Mm-hmm.
You said it wasn't finished, and so you didn't show it, or you didn't show it. Why didn't you show it?
I ran out of time. It really wasn't up to the standards I wanted it to be. I could have forced it. I just needed another day. And I heard about the show sort of last minute, so I was like, yeah, I can do this in 3 days. No, I couldn't. So, anyone else? Okay, thank you.